Botany used to be taught in many schools in the 19th century and even as part of biology courses in university, but had fallen out of favor in the curriculum. That's why when I hear about cool, hands-on botanical projects that kids get to do in school, I'm like, dang, I wish I had that when I was a kid. The Million Orchid Project, orchestrated by Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden and a number of other partners, is one such project.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Downey. I'm the orchid biologist at Fairchild Garden, and my role is to help orchid conservation here in South Florida. So the Million Orchid Project, as the name implies, is this really ambitious effort with the goal of putting 1 million of our lost orchids back into the landscapes of South Florida. And we do this with the help of students and volunteers throughout the community.
And what are we doing here? Because it looks like you have a bunch of orchids that you're giving away.
Yeah, so today's a big day. This is part of our launch of our school year program, of our school programs. So the MOP Challenge, or the Million Orchid Project Challenge, amongst other challenges here at Fairchild, we provide orchids that the students will place into their landscapes of their schoolyards while collecting data to help further our research and our understanding of how these plants behave in an urban landscape. So it's science, it's conservation, and it's outreach.
So how many orchids does a school get?
So today, schools will be getting our Florida butterfly orchid, and that's these guys over here. Cyclia tempensis, also known as the Florida butterfly. It's historically probably our most common orchid that grew here in South Florida. This species will range everywhere from the Caribbean all the way to Tampa Bay. So this is one of the few epiphytic or tree species of orchid that will actually cross the frost line and get to parts of the coastal central Florida. But today, each of the schools will get about a dozen orchids that they will then plant in their trees, or they'll grow in pots or on wood slats to track the survivorship as well as produce seeds. So these plants are all flowering size. And so this year we hope that they'll flower around springtime before they get out of school, and the students will hand pollinate these to generate seed capsules, which we then can spread and disperse around their neighborhoods, but also we can bring back to the lab to propagate more.
And how do you train the teachers, the students to do all of this? Is this something where you provide videos? Is this something where they do this on site? Do you ever go to the schools? How does that dissemination of education happen?
So it's a combination of everything you mentioned. So we actually provide teacher workshops, which trains the teachers in everything they need to know about orchid biology or orchid horticulture, husbandry, how to actually grow them into the landscapes. But we also provide support through the education programs for the student at the student level. So there's YouTube videos, there's Zoom chats, there's things that we can do to keep up with and track the students' progress, but also answer questions in real time. And the education team handles the lion's share of fielding those questions and getting back to the students.
That's awesome. Well, I just saw one teacher who left happy with some orchids.
Absolutely.
And so this is over the course, you see all this monitoring and analyzing and seed collecting. Does this happen over the course of a year or many classes? Is the teacher and the students expected to do this throughout the years, even when they cross different grades?
Well, yeah, so we actually have some teachers that are so dedicated, yes, they may change schools or grades and still take on the program at their new place. But for the most part, each school, a lot of our schools are repeat customers, or they're long-term partners in the research, and they pick up the program each year with a new cohort of students. So they introduce the students to what the previous year's students did, and then they build upon that work and research each year with the idea of getting more species established in their landscape and getting them to the reproductive size and tracking survivorship.
And are you propagating these yourself at, maybe not just you, but in general at Fairchild, or are you working with nurseries? And how are you determining through triage which are the most important of the million orchids? Because a million orchids is a lot, but there's probably a lot more that you want to focus on, and you have to decide which ones to focus on.
Right, so great question. So we've grown about 600,000 orchids, and we've done that largely with the help of volunteers and the general community. We do actually work with a few commercial nurseries simply because the sheer square footage it requires to grow 1 million plants is beyond what we have here at Fairchild. So we do have some local partners and partners abroad that will help us rear or harden off the orchids to a stage like this to where we can get them out into the landscapes. Right now we're focusing on about 12 species, but we selected those species based on what we perceive as their resiliency, right? So one thing that we're seeing throughout the United States, but particularly in South Florida, is something called the heat island effect. And this is a theory and a concept where cities tend to be hotter and drier on average than the natural areas, maybe even adjacent to them. And we're actually kind of seeing those effects in real time. So we wanted to select species that we could survive in hotter and drier conditions. So species that may be coastal, or species that grow in a genotype or a population that grows in a hot, dry forest. So those are the genes that we're looking for in the species we're trying to select. And we even take it another level that we represent multiple populations in our work. So, right? So 1 million orchids is a lot of orchids. So the first question is, okay, what are the genetics of all those plants, right? We don't want to introduce a clone, 1 million of one individual genotype.
Right.
We actually collect seeds from multiple populations, and they actually stay, and we keep them at the regional level. So in other words, we keep all Miami-Dade genetics in Miami-Dade. All Broward population genetics stay in Broward with those schools.
Wow.
West Palm and everywhere in the region. And we actually do that genetic work also with students, and they publish that.
Wow, yeah,
So it's really conservation at all levels.
Like specific ecotypes, essentially.
Correct. We're even
talking.
working on that now with the data
Yeah.
that the students are providing. So do our shade-loving species like the western parts of the county more than the eastern parts of the county because they
Right.
get more precipitation? So we're at that scale, and we're really trying to dial in a lot of really powerful research with students.
So are these all then seed grown? Are you doing like TC with
Nope,
the seed?
all of these are born from seed.
Okay.
And so every individual counts. So you can see at the seedling stage, some are little tiny guys from the same
Yeah.
cohort, and some are big Shaquille O'Neals. So, but again, in conservation, you want all the genetics represented, because some of those runts, for lack of a better word, may have a gene that's more advantageous later on. So we do
Exactly.
not want to select out artificially any genetics.
Also talk about maybe some of the pollinators to orchids here. Are they specialists or are they generalists going to the orchids here that you see in Florida?
Well, in most cases, orchids are known for highly specialized relationships with pollinators. So that's why they come in all these amazing arrays of flowers and colors and scents and perfumes. Those are usually to attract a very specific clientele of pollinator. But there are some orchids that are kind of generalist pollinated inadvertently by honeybees and bumblebees, and that actually happens quite often, probably more often than we think, simply because where we plant these, they're growing in high densities, and insects kind of check them out. But things like Epidendrum nocturnum, which is flowering here, is going to be definitely a specialized pollinator that attracts moths. It's night fragrant, and it has a long nectar tube, which has evolved to coincide with the tongue length of usually a sphinx moth. And so those would be a great example of a very specialized pollinator syndrome with the Epidendrum nocturnum, or the night fragrant epidendrum. It's a beautiful flower.
Yeah, I mean, it's also something to think about, because if there's orchids that are falling by the wayside, I mean, then your specialist pollinator kind of goes with it as
Correct.
well. So it's something to think about when you're actually trying to determine which ones to grow in the nursery and then stick on some trees.
You got it. And we're actually getting to that point in the program as it's grown. We're now having reproductive flowering sized plants really throughout the entire, again, about 600,000 of them are now out in the communities. And the next question, research question is, are the pollinators still around?
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's what we're finding. And to our delight, we're finding seed capsules. Now, you may not capture the moment because it's usually a rare event, and it's quite random. You have to watch for hours, which I've done in my life too much. But they are producing seed capsules, which is a big check mark in the full circle of conservation.
Right. That's fantastic. So then what are folks getting here? I see that you have a lot of different
Yeah, so we're doing
goodies.
everything. So we want to get the schools addressing, again, this idea and this concept of heat island, an urban heat island effect. So we're giving them rain gauges and temperature gauges where they can record and track rain events in their specific regions. So these are school by school resolutions. So we're really seeing even differences within the county through these data.
That's great, because then you don't have to rely on just the regular weather data.
You
where
got
it's
it.
At an airport, and you're like,
You got it.
That is not representative of what's really on the ground.
Absolutely. And actually last year's data, they did this last year as well, tracking climate data, and we found that some schools had one school had an average of 140 centimeters, and one had 700 centimeters of rain.
Oh, such difference.
So that is an order of magnitude and variation, which
Yeah.
definitely can determine what can grow and thrive in that
Yeah.
area. So they're getting that. Then also they'll get everything they need to grow and attach orchids at their school. So we give them wood planks, again, for schools that may not even have trees, which we do encounter. Every school can participate in our program regardless of their resource level. So we give them wood cypress planks. We give them some coconut husk that they can protect the roots when they're attaching them. We give them twine and liquid nails, which we use to actually attach the orchids to the tree. Sustainable methods, a little spray can as well, hand lenses, and pretty much a little fertilizer just to enhance growth.
Oh, that's great.
Even though they're natives, they won't need fertilizer long term, or water for that matter, but we do try to give them everything to really have success with the program.
And I'm assuming they just plant these like on the grounds of their school.
Correct.
And they have to probably talk to the maintenance people about like, don't take that off.
You got it. So we deal with the weed whacker and the maintenance guys on a yearly basis. And yeah, that communication, the teachers do an amazing job of making sure that's communicated and that they're protected. But again, we're putting out so many, we expect a few to be lost to a million different scenarios. But the idea is really really getting the numbers out in such a number that it doesn't matter if we have some losses.
Yeah, so you had mentioned like the Million Orchids project. You said 600,000 had been propagated. I mean, does that mean you're only 400,000 more away? Like, are you going to go 1 million plus? Like,
yeah, absolutely. So we've now grown beyond our borders here in South Florida. We've now partnered up with areas in the Washington, D.C. area with their native orchid. Our educational classroom model, which is part of the program, can be inserted anywhere in the country and around the world. We're also working in Kerala, India, as well as Dominican Republic. We're trying to launch some things there and exploring options. So the model in the classroom of growing orchids can be reproduced anywhere on the planet. So again, we're hoping this becomes a national, international level where everyone is involved in the conservation of these really beautiful plants.
Well, that is just great. I mean, I think that sometimes you just need to get ideas exchanged for people to say like, hey, I could do that. And just, just the idea of just having a thermometer, like a weather gauge and a rain gauge, and then just the few little items that you shared. It's so simple and so easy, and something that people could not only do in their homes, but like you said, in the schools as well. Kudos to you. This is really a wonderful project.
So my name is Dr. Nicole Tian, and I work at Fairchild with the Million Orchid Project. I'm a botanical research associate. So I run the middle school facet of the Million Orchid program. So we have a decommissioned yellow school bus that was
cool.
Turned into a mobile STEM lab. So that's our Orchid STEM lab bus that visits 30 middle schools every year. Twice, and the students learn the sterile techniques for propagating orchids. They learn all about orchid biology, and we are getting them on the map with planting the rare and endangered orchid species that we're propagating into their schoolyards.
What a really cool idea. So what was the brainchild? Like, who was brainstorming that idea? Because it's so neat. I mean, there's so many different levels and layers in there that you're just like, damn, I wish I were a kid again.
Yeah, so this was a collaboration with UM's architecture school and MDCPS. So MDCPS donated the school bus, and then the architecture students did all the retrofitting to turn everything into the mobile STEM lab.
Oh, cool. You'll have to send me pictures of that. That'll be really neat. Tell me just like the high level of the tissue culture and STEM. Like, what are kids learning? Like, what does it look like in a bus, and how do you sterilize a bus enough in order to make it like basically a little stem cell lab?
So we have 2 laminar flow hoods, which are really high acting HEPA filters. So all of the air that's inside of it is sterile and clean from any germs. So the students put on gloves like they're doing an operation, use rubbing alcohol, and we bleach everything down so everything's really, really clean. And then they're basically just moving the plantlets from the tiny little containers to another one so that they have the fresh nutrients and media, because all of our orchids have to go through several transfers before they're ready to go out into the trees.
And do you have to put them in some kind of climate-controlled room afterwards, or how does that actually work? Like, once they're actually moving one piece to the next, where does it go?
We store them here in the lab at Fairchild, so they're in just like a regular climate-controlled room, 72 degrees or so, and they just sit on the shelf until they're ready for the next transfer or ready to go to the nursery.
Got it. And then how far does the bus go? Like, how many schools have you traversed to?
So every year, the 30 schools are brand new schools.
Oh, okay, all brand new. Okay.
Yep, usually, and they're from from all the way in like the very, very top of Miami-Dade to all the way to the very south. So, North Hialeah to all the way down in Homestead.
Great. Well, this is just phenomenal. I mean, what are the things that you feel like you've really gained from spearheading this program and working with the children?
It's just so much fun to see them excited about plants, to be able to relate orchids, which are so special just to all living organisms, all living plants. And it's just so exciting to see them be excited about having rare and endangered plants in their classroom and taking care of them.
Now, is this the type of work where you're propagating clones, or how does that work?
So we propagate everything via seed because we want that genetic
Okay, so you want the genetic
diversity.
yeah,
for sure.
Great. Well, that is just phenomenal. I mean, I love that work. I love that this could maybe be replicated in other places and other schools. And I have not seen any botanic garden actually really doing this in
Right.
any kind of capacity. So this is just something that I hope could spread to other people for ideas.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, kudos to you. Here we are. Has a really specific smell in here, huh?
Yeah, it's the
banana powder.
Yeah.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
Do you know?
So these are the little ones that the students are doing in the orchid lab.
Would you like a tour? He's like, no.
And I don't even think we have any good seeds in here, but this is what the seeds look like, the fruit pods.
Yeah.
They're like dust. So when they first get planted, they look like this. This is a good one.
And you're just doing it on this like auger?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it has all the nutrients and sugars
Yeah.
and hormones that the plants need to survive.
And then are these like larger ones, or they get
Yep, so they go
transferred to-
from like the tiny containers to like this size, and then they get, this size.
They like understand the native orchids.
Now sometimes I see like auger that's very clear, but this one's very dark.
So one of our first projects that we had students work with is that they tested banana powder, potato powder, and charcoal powder. And they found that the most species responded best to the charcoal powder, which is why we add it now to all of our egg art.
Interesting. So is the charcoal powder also for like to keep it as clean as possible? Because charcoal obviously acts like a filter in a way.
Yep.
Yeah.
So since these containers are sealed, there's byproducts of photosynthesis that just build up inside of here, different
Yeah.
phytochemicals, and so the charcoal just absorbs them and keeps the containers clearer.
And is this you heating it up? Like, do you have to heat it
Yeah,
up? to a
so
certain
it's got
amount?
a really high level of sugar in there,
Yeah.
so it has to be boiled, almost like making candy. So we have volunteers in here that help us out. Tanya's one of our old-time volunteers.
Yeah.
She comes on Saturdays.
That's
Just
fun.
Keeps things flowing.
Stay tuned here because we'll be bringing you more wholesome botanical content around the bend. In the meantime, please have a look at our suite of online houseplant courses and materials, from the 125 houseplant care spreadsheet to the houseplant masterclass. It can all be found at homesteadbrooklyn.com. See you in the next video.